Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Philip. I'm a landscape photographer based in the Midwest, and on this channel we talk about nature, traveling, and photography and how those go together. And on this video I'm going to show you how to put together an HDR photo in Lightroom. Okay, so let's first start out by talking about what an HDR photo actually is. If you already know, or if you're in a hurry and you just want to see me editing the video, go down to the description. I've put a timestamp on when I actually start editing. Anyways, so HDR photography stands for High Dynamic Range Photography. So what's dynamic range? Dynamic range is the ability of a camera to record the difference between the highlights and the shadows, or the light and the dark part of an image, accurately. Now, the human eye has an amazing dynamic range. We can pick up a lot of detail in the highlights and the shadows without any real complications. Now, however, cameras do not have this ability. So what's going to happen is, and I'll show you here in just a moment, is that when you try to, let's just say, get the sky to look like on the back of your camera screen how it looks to your human eye, what's going to happen is that the landscape or the shadows are going to be a little bit darker. And this is due to the limitation of the dynamic range of your particular camera. Now, more expensive cameras have a better dynamic range, and what that means is that they can better handle that difference between the highlights and the shadows. Now, if you don't have a lot of money, or if you're just getting started and you don't want to make that huge investment in a $2,000 or $3,000 DSLR, HDR photography is a great way to kind of use a workflow that kind of works around that limitation, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do. So let's go ahead and hop into the computer and jump into Lightroom. Okay, so we're in Lightroom now, and as you see here, I have two very similar photos. The only difference is the exposure. Now, for the first image I took, I exposed for the shadows, so the landscape. And on the second image, I exposed for the highlights, so the sky in this example. Now, what you'll notice is that in this second shot here, the landscape is completely black. And the reason that is because, again, the dynamic range of my camera can't handle a proper exposure for the sky and also be able to properly expose the landscape. So I personally knew that in this situation this was going to happen, so I thought it'd be a great moment to do an HDR image. And if you look up here at the histogram, that's going to kind of give you a visual illustration of your exposure. Now, if you're interested in a video on histograms specifically, because that's a topic in and of itself, go ahead and leave a comment down in the comment section, and I'll do a video on histograms if people want to see that. But for the purpose of this video, as you can see here, we have this main kind of big spike over here in the histogram over to the right, and we have a lot of empty area over here in the left. And basically what that means is that I have all of my shadow data in this photograph, and I have probably some clipping or blown out areas in my highlights. Now, if you want to check this, you can press J, and that will toggle on your clipped edges kind of like meter. So if you see up here these little red edges, that means there's no information left in that area because it's overexposed. So no information means no detail, no color, etc., and that's not what we want. So I'll go ahead and go over to this next photo, and this one you don't see any of that clipping in the sky. It's really dark down in the bottom. But there isn't a whole lot of clipping, which is good. However, you might think, oh, well then why don't you just use the photo where you're exposed for the highlights and boost your shadows? Now the reason you don't want to do that is because by boosting your shadows up, I mean this would take, it looks about 2.5 stops underexposed. You're gonna introduce a lot of noise into your photo, and we don't want that. So we're just going to go ahead and go back. Now, how do we combine these photos together? Now, if you've done this for a while, you can press Control H and that'll jump you in and automatically start the HDR process. However, you can click on one photo and select the other photo with Shift so that both are selected. We're going to right click and go up to Photo Merge and HDR. Now we're going to wait for Lightroom to do its thing, and while we're doing that, we're going to ask the question of the video. Have you ever done HDR photography before? What's your opinion of it, and is it something that you think is ethical? There's a whole lot of debate about HDR photography and things like that, and what I'll say about it is that when done tastefully, HDR is a great way to kind of get a lot of dynamic images. Now, I'll also say that any negative opinions about it, I think it's important to realize that photography and art is subjective. So, long story short, if you want to do it, you do it. You edit your photos how you want to edit it. That's completely up to you and your own personal taste. And don't let anyone else tell you what looks good to you or how you should edit your photos. It's your art. Do you. So anyways, what's gonna happen here now that our menu's up, we have a few options here. We have auto align. We can leave that checked because that's just gonna align the photos for us. I don't check auto settings because I like to edit it myself. And you have this de-ghost amount. Okay, so what is de-ghosting, right? Like, are we calling Ghostbusters right now? No, it's not like that. Basically what de-ghosting does is the software analyzes movement in between the shots and it smooths that out. So like, in this example, obviously the landscape isn't moving, but in between the time it took me to take these exposures, the clouds have moved some. So the computer is going to adjust for that. Now usually, unless it's something very drastic, I usually just press low and then that does a really good job. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on the low and then let Lightroom build a preview for that. And for this example, there isn't really a whole lot of de-ghosting to be done, and that's good. So we're just gonna go ahead and click merge. And while we're waiting for that video to merge, if you're getting value from this video and it's helping you out, go ahead and press the like button. I would really appreciate it. Okay, so now you see that we have our HDR file created, and you'll see that there's a third photo here that has this HDR DNG attached to it, and that's just how you know which file that you're working with. So now we have a file that has the full dynamic range of our original two images. So let's go ahead and start editing this. Now the first thing that I'll usually do is go ahead and adjust my exposure a little bit for the shadows until that seems about right. And let's go ahead and bring back our highlights from the sky. And now this is kind of the trick with HDR images. Now you have all this dynamic range and you think, oh well, hey, I'll just bump the highlights all the way down and bump the shadows all the way up. And this is where kind of the controversy with HDR happens, is that now this image is like very flat and unnatural looking, and we want to avoid that. So in my opinion, just because you have all of the shadow and highlight detail doesn't mean that you need to show all of it, if that makes sense. So for me personally, I'm going to bring back these highlights a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and drop kind of my shadows, and we're already looking a little bit more natural here. We're going to come in and adjust this contrast a little bit, not too much. And we're going to look at our whites and blacks. That already looks pretty good. I like to add a little bit of texture, just a tad bit of clarity, not too much. We're gonna go ahead and dehaze some. We're gonna do a little bit more vibrance and a little less saturation to kind of balance it out a little bit. Let's go ahead and get our lens correction done and do some sharpening. Gonna mask our sharpening so that it only sharpens the areas that we'd like to be sharpened. All right, now we're getting pretty close here now. So looking at the photo now, what I'm seeing is that I'm looking at the photo and looking at the histogram. The histogram is helping me not only with my eye, but also with the computer, and what the data is telling me that my highlights are probably a little bit too bright. So I'm gonna go ahead and use a graduated filter to deal with that, because at this point I think that the landscape is about where I want it. I can do a few more tweaks to it, but for right now I think it's pretty close to where I want it. So let's go ahead and work on the sky. I'm gonna do a graduated filter. That's up here, or you can just press M. Then I'm gonna go ahead and drop in a graduated filter. And I like where the area that it's affecting, and now I'm just gonna go ahead and highlight the sky. So this you can see that it's red on the screen here, and that's how I know what area is being affected by the graduated filter. I can make that a little bit more selective. We'll talk about that in another video, but basically I'm gonna put a luminance mask and make that a little bit more selective, just so it doesn't affect the landscape as much. So we're gonna go ahead and drop that down a little bit, get a little bit more blue out of the sky. We're gonna drop the highlights a little bit more and bring up the contrast, and maybe add a little bit of warmth to it. I mean, I normally would spend a lot more time editing photos. I mean, I could probably spend at least a half an hour on this photo, but for the purposes of this video, I think this looks pretty natural, and it's a great starting point and example to help you get started in HDR photography. So if you like this video, go ahead and leave a like. If you have any comments or questions, go ahead and leave them down in the comment section. I will get back to you. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, because I will be doing a lot more editing tutorials to kind of help you guys take your photography to the next level, go ahead and subscribe, because there is a lot more fun and entertaining content coming up on the channel. So that's it for this video, and as always, thank you for watching. Bye.